Coming up next is Mark. Mark is calling for something. They didn't give a clear thing. Mark, if you can hear me, please provide me with your age and pronouns.
I'm 58, and my pronouns are T10.
So, Mark, if you're going to start off the call disingenuous, why should I speak to you?
I'm not being disingenuous.
You told the call-in screener your age was 39, but you're telling me 58. That would be disingenuous. It would tell me that you're starting the call off lying. If you're going to start the call off
I
disingenuous,
misspoke.
what year were you born, Mark?
You told me to call in and ask you
Okay,
what a
so you are
female
starting
is.
that. So you are
What is
starting
a
the call
female?
disingenuous. I don't need to talk to people that are disingenuous, Mark. There's only one way we can go forward with this call, and that's you be truthful, you be honest. If you're going to start disingenuous, there's no reason for me to be here.
What is a female?
See you later, Mark. Would have been real easy. I mean, call in and don't lie to me in the call-in screener. That would have been a super easy thing to do. But Mark didn't want to do that. Mark wanted to be disingenuous. So goodbye, Mark. Try Mark again. Okay, Mark. Now that we'll see if you can be a genuine caller this time. Age and pronouns, Mark.
26, he, him.
There we go. Glad to know you lied before. So you're not starting off on a great foot, Mark. What specific topic were you calling about, Mark?
You had replied to one of my comments, and I just want to know what a female is. Because within your definition of what is a woman, you use the word female. So I'm just confused. Yep. I'm not a very smart person. I have a low IQ. I'm not very literate. I don't know what a female is.
A female would typically be in a human who produces large gametes. Well, we're talking about females, talking about female humans, but yeah, female would be someone that typically produces large gametes.
But they don't have to produce large gametes, so that seems like it's not a very solid definition because it doesn't have a necessary condition.
Definitions don't need necessary conditions. Categorization needs necessary conditions. Definitions tend to not operate.
Definition of categorization. Because then I guess my next follow-up would be, what's the difference between a male and a female?
The ability to produce large or small gametes. I mean, there's more, but that is the one that we would typically analyze. Again, definitions don't tend to have necessary conditions. Again, definitions don't tend to have necessary conditions. Hence why the definition of
categories do.
Correct, but you're asking me a definition, not a category. A definition gives us a rudimentally. Mark, I don't know if you want an answer to your questions or if you want to try to overtalk me. Which one?
No, you just gave me an answer to my question, so I'm asking another one. In terms of the categories of male and female, what are the necessary conditions for them, and what's the difference?
So I don't categorize male and female on a necessary condition basis. They would be done using cluster categorization or familial categorization, which is sex being on a bimodal distribution model. You have two extremes, and then you have a large litany of places people can fall within those extremes. The very broad extreme for male and female are broad. The very ends of the spectrum would be a being that has, like a sexual being that has, we'll go female, for example. They have large gametes. They have internal and external genitalia that would be vaginas, the internal, that would be the external. The internal genitalia would be uterus, fallopian tubes. It would be external genitalia done by the non-activation of an SRY gene. They would have female-specific gonads, and then they would have, they would typically have more estrogen or other female hormone production than they would feminine hormone production than they would masculine hormone production. That would be like the extreme end, and then it would be the opposite on both. And then the less you have of those, the further towards the middle of the spectrum you fall. Because we categorize sex on a spectrum model, not a binary model.
Do we also categorize gender on a spectrum model and not a binary model?
Typically, yes. Depending on what society you're in, you're going to classify gender differently. But in the West, yes, gender is probably even more spectrumed because gender is going to relate to traits and behaviors that we typically see within the sexes. And so that's going to be even more broad than the 5 sex type or the 5 sex determinant traits.
So what are non-physical traits that are on the extreme end of, let's say, the man gender spectrum.
It would depend on what society you're in.
This society, Western society.
Even that, you gotta broaden it down even further, or not broaden it. You have to tighten it up even further.
That almost seems like that this is even more meaningless. It's not based in science. I mean, let me ask a clarifying question.
Well, it's definitely based in science. Sociology is science.
Regardless of what society you live in, humans are all the same, right? We're all
what do you mean by
races or different?
Do you just mean we're all of the same species? Sure, but what does that matter? What's the relevance of that?
What matters is if our biochemistry determines our sex and then has a lot to do with determining our gender, it wouldn't matter what culture you're in or
our sex. What our sex is doesn't determine what our gender is.
Pardon?
What our sex is does not determine what our gender is.
Well, to use a word you used a lot, it typically does, doesn't it? It doesn't typically. It's not typical that what your sex is matches your gender.
Your sex and gender aligning are two different things than your gender being determined by your sex.
Let's say aligning. Isn't it typical that they align?
Yes, typically people's sex and genders align, yes.
But there's different perceptions of what sex even is.
There's different perceptions of what sex is? What are you talking about?
In your definition of what a woman is, you said it has to do a lot with how they perceive sex based on their culture and society and their subconscious understanding of what sex is.
It's how they perceive their own sex. It's how their brain recognizes their sex and whether or not that aligns with their schema on the sex in question.
But couldn't their schema for a woman say, my subconscious schema of what a woman is includes having a penis?
Could.
Okay. So then sex doesn't really have any sort of true definition or
schemas
or any sort of...
No. You're having trouble here, Mark.
Schema's different.
Mark, you're having trouble on Mark.
What this is
Mark, you're having trouble in understanding what schema is. This is yikes. I would have assumed you would have done some like initial research before calling in.
Can anyone have an incorrect schema about what a male or female is?
No, that's not how schema works.
Okay, so there's nothing that makes someone a male or female. There's nothing that makes someone a man or woman.
You're a male or female based on your distribution of the 5 sex traits. That is different than what your schema is, Mark. This is why I said you probably should have researched what schemas were before you called in.
But you said that you can have a perception of your sex. Like, again, let me ask it this way. If I got reverse bottom surgeries, I don't know what you call it, but if I got rid of my penis and changed it for a vagina and started wearing dresses and called myself Jessica and started pumping myself full of estrogen, but I still considered myself a cis man, would I be wrong?
Nope, you would just be a cis man who likes to look kind of feminine sometimes. Well, probably most times.
Well, not just look feminine, but has also started to alter my hormones and my biology.
Yeah, you'd be a cisgender man. You'd be a cisgender man who likes to look more like what typically a female would look like. But you'd still be a cisgender man because your gender identity is still that of cisgender man.
Would I still be a male?
Would you still be a male? Possibly not. You might not be male at that point.
When have I crossed over?
There is no clean line.
So how do we even know that there is a difference between male and female?
Of the distribution of the traits. So, for example, a doctor may consider you male or may consider you female because you have increased your hormone production of estrogen. So they may say, "Oh, because of this, we're going to treat you like a female." They may say, "Oh, we're actually not going to do it until you've also had bottom surgery." They may say, "Oh, we're not going to do it until X, Y, or Z." Categorization isn't clean like you want it to be. So I don't know why you're Like you're trying to make it like any other form of categorization is clean like this. It's not.
But I think if categorization gets so messy to the point where there's no definable difference between the two categories, then I think the categorization is just pointless. And I don't even know why we have it or what its purpose is.
Let me ask you a question, Mark. When does a stool become a chair?
When does a stool become a chair?
Yep.
I mean that's typical ontological. What if you burn the stool and you
Mark,
just have the ashes and the smoke? Is that still a chair?
Mark, I would love you to answer I've answered every question you've asked me. I would love for you to answer one without resorting to trying to question your way out of it.
No one has
that wasn't even
a question.
That wasn't even
a no answer for that question. Hold
on, Mark. It's not a trick question.
There is no answer.
Why is there no answer, Mark?
If I take that stool and I burn it, and
Mark, why is there no answer, Mark?
Do I still? I'm explaining to you. Is that still a stool? If I burn the stool and have the ashes and the smoke,
I would like you to answer the question without resorting to questions.
There is no. What's your answer then? I don't think there is an answer to that question. What is your answer?
I would agree with you, but I'm asking you why you believe that.
Wait, agree with which part of what I said?
I would agree. I don't think there is an answer to the question, when does a stool become a chair?
Or what even is a stool? Or what is a chair?
And I'm asking your reasoning for why you believe this.
Why there's no definition?
I'm not talking about definitions. Actually, let me go a step further. What is it? What is the purpose of definitions, Mark?
To categorize things based on our material understanding of reality.
I would disagree.
To define differences that apply in most cases. It might not fit literally every single abnormal case, but it's typical.
I would disagree.
Okay, then what's your definition?
My definition of what?
Or what's your reasoning for why we have definitions?
Definitions are just ways to say how people commonly use phrases. They're just ways for us to know when someone says something, what people typically tend to mean. They're very broad, and they're broad for a reason. They're not meant to be anything but broad, because you can absurd your way into any definition of anything ever. Definitions are just meant to describe how people typically tend to use words at any given point in human history. Whenever you're opening the dictionary, like whatever year that dictionary was published.
Sure, but it sort of goes beyond typical. Like when you say the phrase bimodal spectrum, we could sit here and make that phrase mean absolutely nothing, because what even is bimodal? What even is a spectrum? How do these things even work? But you use that phrase in a way where it does essentially have a pretty strict definition as to what it means. We can get ontological and make it mean nothing, just like we can do with basically anything.
Do you believe definitions are descriptive or prescriptive?
In order for us to communicate, these things have to mean something that we all agree on. And there can be exceptions, and there can be confusing. What is a stool? What is a chair?
M&Ms.
When does something not become something?
Mark, do you believe definitions are descriptive or prescriptive?
What do you mean by that?
I don't know how to say that sentence any clearer than I just did.
What do you mean by descriptive or prescriptive?
I don't know how to make that sentence any clearer than the way I phrased it.
Well, if you can't explain your question and what it means, then I don't know.
I don't know how to make that question any clearer than the way I phrased it. Are definitions descriptive or prescriptive?
I'm not a very smart person. If you ask that question to a child and they said, I don't know what that means, would you just say, well, I guess there's nothing I can do about it?
You're telling me the 26-year-old Mark, you have the understanding of a child?
I'm not a very smart person.
What does the word descriptive mean?
I don't know. How are you using that? What does that mean?
Mark, remember when you said you were ready to be a genuine caller? So that was the lie detector test determined that was a lie?
What do you mean by descriptive?
So the lie detector test determined that was, in fact, a lie.
So you're just avoiding answering that question.
Mark, I don't do sophistry. Okay? It's useless.
I don't know what that
It
means
doesn't
either.
do it doesn't do anything for us. So when you're
What do
ready
you
to
mean
be
by
serious, you
sophistry?
can call back. But
I'm
until then,
being
there's
very
no
serious.
real
I'm trying to
until then
ask
there's
you
no real
about
reason to continue the
I'm trying to ask you
conversation.
about the words that you're using. What I
Yeah,
don't even
Mark,
know what is sophistry.
Mark, when you're ready to be serious, you can call back. But until then, there's no real
I'm
point.
being serious.
I have people waiting on the line, and you're not only wasting my time, you're wasting theirs.
You're the only one wasting time by not just saying what is sophistry. You used a word. What does that
Mark,
mean?
what does the word describe mean?
Can you use it in a sentence?
No.
Okay. You are physically incapable of using that in a sentence? Do you know what describe means?
No, I don't engage in sophistry. So goodbye, Mark.
What is sophistry?
See you later. I don't know why you think the trolling's going to work here. I'm just going to move on. Unserious people get unserious Jovan. Serious people can get serious Jovan. But unserious people get unserious Jovan. Hey, thank you all for watching this video. If you don't know me, I'm Jovan Bradley. I'm a leftist content creator who does debates, political commentary, gaming, and so much more. If this is your first video, thanks so much for sticking to the end, and I hope you subscribe. I cannot stress enough how much subscriptions help small channels like mine, and I'm trying and shooting to get to 100K this year, so if you could help out, please hit that subscribe button. I post videos daily, and there are hundreds of past debates on my page for you to enjoy. And also, thank you to all my YouTube members. Your continued support helps me create as much as I can. Consider joining. A membership starts at $2.99 and gets you access to our community Discord, early access to videos, access to our tri-weekly book club, and so much more. Special shout out to all my Tier 4 members: Ellie McReady, Emery Imogene, Orange Femboy 22, Olivia B, BAMG, Lost Fox, Phoenix, Papa Snowflake, Wolfie, Divinity Dawn, Ryan O'Connors, Kazim, Ryan Wright, Zeus, Yemia Storm, Jake Rorshander, Kelsey K8581, Vampy Says Fuck Ice, O Diggy Doc, Ayla Ursus, Anaxiel, Mealybun, Pauled232, Ryan Wright 221, Plebeian, Divinity Dawn 3065, Wolfie Lex, Papa Snowflake, Zeus 6867, Phoenix, Rain of the Fox 6600, Elira the Free, Lamia 666, Olivia B AR, Flat 6345, Cabbage Spilla, Chris Reynolds 095, Emery Imogene, Wesley, Soloing Yaverse, Random Dude on the Internet, Kazim, Sin Images, BAMG12, Vet Voice Sarah, and Sylvia Snow F8Q. Your continued support goes a long way in helping me continue the fight for equity, justice, and education. Thank you again for watching.